Hello and welcome to Main Street Matters by Heart on Main Street, the podcast that knows a good relationship is the key to long-term success. I am your host, Patrick Kaiser. I am so excited for our episode today. I have two guests, Sheila Tarasuik and Faith Broderick of Petal Retail Advisors. Petal Retail Advisors is the only retail real estate brokerage and advisory firm dedicated to the needs of startup, small, and independent brick and mortar retail stores in the U.S. So it's incredibly unique, the services that they offer and their perspective. Both Sheila and Faith grew up in retail with their parents owning retail stores. Sheila also owned small businesses herself, and through their work with Petal Retail, they have helped hundreds of other small business owners navigate the leasing process and finding their new retail home. This is our most recent webinar, our January webinar. So if you'd like to watch this, you can through our website, heartonmainstreet.org, or on our YouTube page, which is at Heart on Main Street. And you can also register for upcoming webinars through heartonmainstreet.org as well. Without further ado, here are Sheila and Faith to talk to you about navigating the leasing process in our New Year, New Store webinar.
Like Patrick said, while we have an hour, we're going to try to share with you for around 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end, because we know there's probably a lot of burning questions about your store and how you can either launch a new store, open one for the first time, start a lease renewal, what have you. So we're very thrilled to be here, and thank you so much, Patrick, for extending the invitation to Sheila and I to present.
Thank you all for being here.
So like Patrick said, we are Petal Retail Advisors, and to our knowledge and all of the vast research we've done, we are the only real estate brokerage and advisory firm that focuses solely on small businesses, indie businesses, and mom and pops. Like Patrick said, Sheila and I both grew up with retail running in our families. Both of our families ran their own small businesses. Sheila was an operator herself. She ran multiple restaurants and scaled restaurants. I took the lessons I learned from my parents' retail and went into urban planning and economic development. And Sheila's co-founder and our co-founder here at Petal, Abby, was a retail broker for many, many years and saw just how the real estate field did not necessarily work for the small business community. And so Sheila and Abby put their two strengths together from the operator perspective and from the broker perspective and created a brand new system and set of tools that are focused solely on supporting entrepreneurs and small businesses with anything that touches real estate and retail. So we do that in lots of different ways, That's okay. From Dream Space. So if you're a first-time retailer and you know that you want to open a space, but you've never had a lease or brick and mortar, we help you there. If you're an operator that already has one or two spaces, but you need to continue looking for space, we support you on brokerage. And then on the consulting side, anything that touches a lease and touches retail or touches economic development, we support you there. So that is our spiel. And at Petal, we have two mottos. So real talk always, we'll hit you with the truth, and we always promise to do that because we know that you deserve to know how the sausage is made and all the difficulties and hurdles that it might take to open up a brick and mortar. But we also know that when there's a will, there's a way. And so while there are many hurdles and obstacles that we're going to need to talk about and confront as small business owners, we know that if you're dedicated to making it happen, we can find a solution that works for you and your business. So those are our dual mottos. And today we'll talk about some of those hurdles along the way. So all the things that you have to consider and think about as you are contemplating a brand new store or a second store. So all the new opportunities that are coming your way. And if you're already operating and you're contemplating a renewal, sort of all the things that you'll need to do and think about to make sure that your renewal works for you over the next 5-10 years. And then, like I said, we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A. So from there, I'll turn it over to Sheila.
Great. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, but I just wanted to mention real quickly, when we have these two mottos, because oftentimes during these presentations, or even when we're talking to people, clients and non-clients, when we're talking about how the system works or what you need to do to be prepared or what you need to look out for, it can sound like we're trying to be discouraging, and that's not at all the case. So we just sort of tell it like it is and recognize that You can do whatever you want. Everything is possible. So none of this is ever meant to sound discouraging at all. So we're going to really scratch the surface today. One of the things that we found to be most helpful is that just having a basic understanding of what this ecosystem is of retail real estate, that's so much more helpful than talking about specific terms. We're going to talk about some of that later, but understanding holistically how this entire system operates, like where commercial real estate and retailers actually cross paths, just understanding what that interaction looks like and how it's going to work is basically half the battle. Because as you all probably know, like, no one understands what it's like to be a retailer unless you've been a retailer. You just don't. And similarly, unless you've had to really tangle with the world of commercial real estate multiple times, you would have no reason to know how that stuff is supposed to work. So it's really no one's fault that we've got to sort of talk about some of these terms and basics. It's just like that's sort of the way the world is, and now we're trying to bring them together. So with that said, let's start with new opportunities. So here we're really talking about when you're in business, and that's maybe you could be even a pop-up, or you already have one store or two stores, and you are approached in some way, either in real life or via email or text, by usually a broker, a landlord's broker, saying something like, "Oh my gosh, I've got the perfect space for you," or "Oh my gosh, there's a wonderful space coming available and we would love to have you there." Sometimes even it's just you driving down the street and you're like, "Oh, wow, look, there's a for lease sign on that." So it is really common when we are presented with the opportunity to open another store or to go from a more short-term arrangement to a long-term situation. It's very exciting, and it is very, very possible and likely to be kind of love bombed by the opportunity, and especially by the people who are telling you that they really want you there, right? If you're hearing from someone that they've got a space that they really want you to see, that's because they represent the landlord, right? They want to lease that space. They also think you're awesome. They also think that you would do well there, but they're representing the interests of the landlord. Now that means we can't trust them or listen to them, but it does mean that we have to look, we've got to pause a second, and we have to look internally. So the place to start the evaluation process, like before you would even go on a tour to see a space, you've really got to start by looking in the mirror, so to speak, of your business. Because as soon as you go out and see a space, it's exciting and you think about the possibilities, and it's really hard to get unexcited about something. And so the stakes get raised when you start going on tours. So it's in your best interest to pump the brakes and to do the sort of first set of work. We're going to talk about that, but to do the sort of first set of work to determine what your situation is before you would really start engaging. I think this is particularly, it's particularly, risky is not the word, but when you're a retailer, it can get really boring, like doing the do every day, right? Say like same day, different problems. So when you see an opportunity for something new and exciting, or when someone comes to you, it's like everything in our body like wants to pursue. It's like, this sounds exciting. So it's like that's totally normal and totally natural. And it may be that it makes a lot of sense. But we have to start by evaluating the situation of the business. We're going to talk about that, but that's the place to start before you really start going down that path. Why is that the case? Because leases are legal documents. They are binding contracts that last for many years. Most commercial leases are 5 to 10 years long. Why is that the case? Well, brick and mortar businesses take a lot of capital upfront costs, right? It takes a lot of money to get in, to fix up a space, to buy the inventory, to grow the customer base, to develop the repeat business. That takes time. And so a brick and mortar business is betting on the fact that their overall success of a business is going to be best in a brick and mortar space, but you need time. So because of that, these contracts are pretty long. From the other end, property owners, they own this property. They want as much security as they can, knowing that someone is on the hook to pay rent. Because when they're talking to their bankers, right, and they're looking at their profit and loss statements, they don't get to count something unless they know that you're going to be paying rent in 2 years, in 3 years. So the bank doesn't care, right, if you're there now, but you're not obligated for 3 years. Like, the property owners want to have you there for a long time for lots of reasons, but typically it's a mutually beneficial arrangement. But any agreement that lasts longer than a single presidential administration is serious, right? A lot happens in 5 years. So that's why we say before you really start engaging, we need to pump the brakes and look at what's going on with our business. And now Faith is going to talk more specifically about really what all that looks like.
So one thing, going back to the last slide, is we always talk about the continuum of how serious a lease is. And we typically like to say that it's
the slide.
That's okay. Why is there a baby on this slide? Because a lease is really in between sort of the seriousness of a marriage and the seriousness of having a child, right? A marriage, you can wake up one morning and say, I would like to get out of it, and you can. A child, typically, if you wake up one morning very tired, you cannot get out of having that child. Whereas a lease is somewhere in the middle, right? Where it takes a lot of you've signed a lease for, to Sheila's point, a fixed amount of time, either 5 or 10 years, and you're really legally bound to all of the different components of the lease for that term.
Yes, and thank you, Faith, for explaining the slide. That's definitely not self-explanatory. But yeah, definitely the point here is that you can't just change your mind. Like circumstances will change. Right? Things in your life will change. Your priorities will change. Your family situation is going to change. The road will change, but your lease binds you. So you can't just decide the business isn't working, or I won the lottery and I'm moving to Paris, or my mother needs me to care for her in California. I've got to move. So it's like you're obligated, which means that you've got to really be sure that this is what you want to do. Now, you're not imprisoned, right? There's always a way out, but it's never easy and it's never cheap.
Perfect. Thanks. So we're going to now talk about all the preparation that you need to do to make sure that you're making a commitment that you feel really confident in, knowing that it will last for that long period of time that we talked about. And so maybe it's because Valentine's Day is coming up, but we have like relationships on the mind. We just talked about marriage. Now we're going to talk about essentially how you get married, right? And so we sort of look at signing a lease almost like that. And so this is like the continuum of dating. So all retailers, no matter who you are, whether you're a first-time brick and mortar or if you're a Starbucks, every single time that you're thinking about a new retail venture, you have to think about 5 different stages. And it's sort of like vetting a potential partner. You're going to have to think about planning. You're going to have to think about space search. You're going to have to think about all of the components of a letter of intent, the lease, and then pre-opening. So in planning, you're really thinking about what are the core criteria that I need to run a successful retail business. That'll be anywhere from where you need to be in the city, county, region. It'll be what the amount of space that you need. What are the key components of that space that you need? So if you're a restaurant, you're going to need different things than if you're a more traditional boutique store. So this is the equivalent of like being on a dating app and starting to swipe, right? You're starting to think about the things that you want to see in a potential partner. So you have your laundry list of components that you want in a potential space.
space.
Then
I think another way to look at that also is that this is like before you even start dating, right? Because it's like you know what you're looking for because you've thought about what you want first, but it's like articulating. It's like, why am I swiping right on this person or left on that person? It's like, what is it? Well, how do I articulate what it is that I'm looking for? Do I want someone who's going to hike with me in the Alps, or is that not important to me, right? So it's like identifying what your needs are. And we'll talk more about that in the next slide. But at that point, you can start looking.
Precisely. Thanks. And so then once, to Sheila's point, you know exactly what you're looking for, then you're able to start actually going out and looking at potential spaces, right? This is where I think Sheila mentioned earlier, folks get very excited about actually doing the space tours because you're starting to be able to envision what your future dream space might look like. And during the space search, you'll start to identify whether those spaces actually work for you. So maybe they check off some of the boxes. They're in the right general location, but maybe they don't have the frontage that you need. So you'll start to identify exactly how that space could work for you. And as you go through all that space search, you'll be able to see, you'll be able to focus in almost like a funnel on the ideal location for your retail space. Once you've done that, that's when you can start to engage with the letter of intent. Letter of intent is not a legally binding document, but it is essentially all of the business terms that will be outlined in your lease. And this is where you and the landlord will really be able to identify exactly what the key criteria are for you and for them, right? So you'll be able to hash out all the essential business terms from what your rent will look like, the length of term you'll have, everything that would be a major sticking point in a lease. That'll all be worked out through the letter of intent. Then you get into the lease. So while the LOI is a couple pages, the lease is like many, many pages. We're looking at 40 plus pages here. And this will really be sort of like the nitty gritty of everything that will be legally binding for you within your lease. So going back to like the dating reference, an LOI is like essentially like getting engaged, right? You've committed to that space and committed to one another. And by the time you get to lease, you're essentially getting married. And then unfortunately, the metaphor ends there because the pre-opening phase is not quite a honeymoon. There's a lot of work to do. And part of that, you're looking at build out, you're looking at construction, you're contemplating all of your pre-marketing, opening, your staffing, you're doing all of the components to gear up and get ready for day one. And then maybe that's when the honeymoon starts, when you're working and the doors open.
And the analogy sounds silly, but when you think about it, it actually really makes a lot of sense. Like you really need to know what it is that's important to you before you can identify like what's even attractive, right? Like space search is like walking into a bar or an event and you're like, you're cute, you're cute, you're cute, but you don't know anything about anybody, right? If your LOI is when you're dating, right? And we're like, this is what I like. This is what I like. You know, this, I want to live on the East Coast. I want to live on the West Coast. Like, are our core business terms, our deal breakers met through one another, right? So typically you're dating a few LOIs, right? We like to have like 3, at least 2, because you want options. You don't know, and you want to be able to say like, is this working or is this working? What starts to feel like a better match? When you go to lease, you really only have one. When you're in lease, the landlord is intending to commit to you and you are intending to commit to the landlord. So you're only like lease, like that's really when you're engaged, right? When you get to the beginning of the lease negotiations. During the negotiations, that's like your period of engagement, right? Invitations are going out, we're booking venue, like we're really starting to be serious about the future, but it's not done until you whatever, say your vows and sign your thing at the courthouse. So you can bail at any point until that lease is signed. So you won't get your deposit back, right, for your venue. You are paying for your lawyer, money you won't get back, but way better to bail before you commit than to commit to the wrong person or space.
Okay, perfect. So part of the one of the major like fundamentals of finding the right space is doing all of the planning first. We've talked about how this whole process takes a long time, and planning is the fastest way to get through it because you will understand exactly what you need and what your key criteria are to open up a space by really sitting with all of the fundamentals of what you need to have a successful retail business. And so we talk about this as figuring out your BLTs, which is your budget, your location, your timeline, and your space criteria. And all of these pieces are interconnected. So your budget, what you can spend on a build out, will be impacted by the location. And the location may impact your space criteria because there may be some locations that just don't have the right zoning for you. And the space criteria may impact the timeline. So these are all sort of holding hands on one another. But the point about planning is really to be able to plan for how to optimize your business, right? How to have the most successful business you can. And so you're sitting with your budget first. You're thinking about your projections over the term of your lease, right? So 5 or 10 years, you're looking at your projections, and you're thinking about your capital budget. Exactly how much money will you have on hand to be able to build out and get open day one, and then be able to begin operations and carry yourself through that first year. Your location is really where you're thinking about your target customer, both who are they, where they live, where they like to work, and what type of space do they feel like comfortable like walking into. How do they get there? Are they drivers? Are they walkers? Do they take the metro, depending on where you are? Those are all the sort of things you want to be thinking about in terms of how your core customer and your target customer will view your location. Your timeline, this is really a reflection on everything that you're going to need to get open. So it's how much money do you have available? And if you're going to need to fundraise or if you're going to need to take out a loan, that'll impact your timeline. Depending on the type of retail space you need and what you need to what you're going to need there to make your business work. Like the build out may be slightly more complex, which will either add to the timeline, or if it's not complex and you can get away with a little bit of a white box, then your timeline will shrink there. And then thinking about the how much time you actually need to get open and when you want to be open, depending on the type of retail business you are, the seasonality will also impact sort of your timeline and the spaces that you're choosing based on that. And then your space criteria, those are all the essentials that you're going to need to run a business, right? So if you're a restaurant, you're going to need venting, and you're going to be thinking about spaces that have the appropriate venting and grease traps for you. If you are doing more catering or wholesaling, you're going to need a different type of loading component than somebody who is not doing those things. So space criteria is really all of the fundamentals that will inform the type of brick and mortar business that you're looking for. So these BLTs are really essential as you start going into the space search, because if you don't have this figured out, you're going to start running into these questions as you're looking at spaces, and it's going to be a little overwhelming as you're trying to figure out the planning while you're looking through the space.
Yeah, and you can imagine that if you haven't put all this down first to say, all right, this is what my business needs. This is the rent I can afford. This is how much I can spend on the build out. This is, my business has to have customer parking, whatever. If you haven't identified the things that are essential for your business, you can see a space that looks amazing and you're like, well, do we really need customer parking? Or like, maybe I can, I'll add coffee and then we'll sell more. So it's like you start kind of compromising your business to make an opportunity work. But if you anchor yourself first, you're really making it, you're holding yourself accountable to what you've already established you need. So that when you go out into the world looking for space, you are really ready to engage. When we get to space search, this is one of the most misunderstood parts of this entire process. Because normal people, we feel like, great, this is it. Like, I'm going to start looking at spaces. And I'm going to see if I like this, see if I like that. And so we treat it almost like we're the test driving cars, right? Or we're going out to see if we like something. But in reality, the negotiation between ourselves and a landlord begins the moment the landlord's broker unlocks the door for us, or the moment we meet out front. Because as soon as we are eye to eye with the landlord or their broker, they're immediately sizing us up to say, is this person, is this business capable of being successful here? Are they capable of actually making it all the way through a transaction? Are they likely to have the funding they need to do the kind of build out that I know that's required here? So for those reasons, it's really a lot more like a job interview. So when you go into the space search, you are ready, right? You have your elevator pitch prepared. You know what your criteria are. You're familiar with your projections. You know who your customers are. You've thought about all of these things. You've already seen the space, right? You've driven by before, and you're saying, what's going on in that building over there? Or like, are those windows being replaced? So it's not your first time being there, because when you show up as informed and professional, then immediately you're signaling to the landlord and their side that you're to be taken seriously, and that you're familiar with this process, and you're going to be engaged, and you're not just going to be steamrolled during this. And frankly, most landlords don't want to steamroll you. They want to engage with a business that is professional and looks like they're going to be able to pay that rent for 5 or 10 years. So that means like it's less about being taken advantage of and more about even being allowed to be considered to negotiate a deal, right? Because landlords, property owners, do not have to lease to anybody they don't want to. So it's completely within the property owner's discretion, which means that there's a lot of sales sort of on our end as business owners to be walking in and saying like, yeah, I'm ready, let's do this. So we looked at some spaces, great. We found a few that we think we like, great. We're starting to date now. We found a few that we like. The LOI, as Faith explained, is a short form, non-binding document, has about 24 terms. Breakers, right? Things like, how much rent am I going to pay? How long am I going to be there? What am I allowed to do in the space? How much of a security deposit do I have to put down? Am I responsible for the HVAC, or are you responsible for the HVAC? So these are the deal breaker terms that are literally the blueprint for the lease. So the lease takes the blueprint of the LOI, and then it really starts to build it out with all of the details. So it wraps the business terms in all of the legalese and all of the true weedsy details about everything that will happen, might happen, could happen, probably won't happen, but might. Like, we're addressing all of those things in the lease, and it's like, why? Because the whole point of the lease is to get on the same page, to come to an agreement on basically anything that could happen over this 5-10 years together, so that we're not in court suing each other, right? We're pre-deciding all of these things. So it's like we're spending the time on the legal stuff in the beginning so that we're not dealing with it later. It's always a lot more expensive the second time. So we're turning that LOI into a lease. When we get to the lease, that's when we're paying attorneys. So you don't want to go to lease on a space where you're not in agreement on like what the rent is, right? You want to agree. So an LOI should always precede a lease. I'll mention this because it's also a common, it's not a misconception, or no one really knows it, but yes, it is very common for the landlord to issue the first round of the LOI. The landlord's broker should be giving it to your broker. We haven't talked a lot about this, but you should absolutely have a retail broker representing you. There are brokers on both sides to represent both parties. So it's typical for the landlord to give you the first LOI. We like to say that that's like the landlord giving you their Christmas wish list, and then we take it and give back our list. And then it gets traded back a few times, and that's when we start to figure out, like, what can you live with and what can I live with? So it's normal to get one from the landlord. And when you look at the first thing, like, it's not a price tag. The landlord expects you to negotiate it. And so when you look at it and you're like, I can't do that, fine. You don't have to, right? You need to negotiate what you need according to your criteria. So we negotiate the really important things in the LOI so that we can then move on to lease. But if you take anything from this presentation, it's this: everything is negotiable. Everything. So that's it, period. Like, there's no world where the landlord says it has to be this, or they're only no, everything's negotiable. You might not come to an agreement, but you can absolutely negotiate everything, and everyone does all the time. Okay. So this process takes a while. It surprises people sometimes to know that the process from really space search to assigned lease, typically when all things are going well, like everybody's agreeing, it's 6 months at the fastest. And that's just the time that the deal takes, right? It's how long both parties need in order to respond to documents, to think about things, to reply. So you're sort of moving with intention, but there's just a lot to figure out. And back to our original analogy, it's like, yeah, if you're going to marry somebody, like, yeah, maybe date for 6 months. So it's okay to spend time on the front end before you're making such a big commitment. Now, people frequently come to us and say, can you just make it faster? I really want to be in there. I really want to be open before Christmas, or there's just no way it's going to take me that long. No way. Well, the truth is that you can't rush that process faster than it can possibly operate. So the only way, like, yes, you can make it go faster, but the only way to make the real estate process go faster is to just sign what's been given to you, or to stop negotiating and just sign it. So you can make it go faster, but if you want to engage to ensure that what you're signing is going to work for you, which you do, obviously, that just takes a little bit of time. So that's fine. Like, just know that, because when you're looking at a space, like, generally we like to say you should be thinking probably a year away. And that's, it depends on what kind of business it is, but generally, like, you're not going to be open in 6 months. You shouldn't be. Well, you could if you don't negotiate. So, like a chicken, right? You can cook it in the microwave. It's not going to be very good.
Perfect. And so you also need an entire team to help you negotiate. So all of these different professionals will ensure the fact that you are negotiating for your best interest in all these different ways. And so, like Sheila mentioned, you want a retail real estate broker. The landlord that you will eventually take space from, they will have their own broker. You want somebody who is representing your interests, and they will be the ones negotiating all the key business terms that we've spoken about earlier. So they are fundamental to have on your team and in your corner. The next person you'll want is a lawyer. And so, like Sheila mentioned, the lawyer will come into play with the lease, right? That's why we want the LOI tight, so that you're not wasting your own capital and your lawyer's time reviewing lots of different things that you haven't already agreed to. The lawyer really needs to be somebody who is a retail expert. There are lawyers that are divorce lawyers that are great, but they cannot help you here. You want an attorney that is a real estate professional and a retail professional. They know how to protect you the best, and they will also be the ones that have reviewed lots and lots of retail leases, and will know sort of the most expedient way to get you to a signed lease. So very important that you have a lawyer that's specialized. You'll also want contractors and architects throughout this entire process. Sometimes it's just the contractor, sometimes it's contractor, architect, project manager. But these folks are really important because they can tell you if the space that you're looking at will actually work for your business type. They can help you with a test fit. So if I am a boutique spin studio and I'm looking at a space and it's not a perfect box, I would want an architect to tell me, can I actually make this space work for me before I enter into lease negotiations, right? So the architect will help you there. The contractor will also tell you and help you figure out exactly how expensive it will be to build out. So as you're now contemplating your construction cost and your build out cost, those are key components that will then be layered into the LOI and the lease so that you're advocating for lease terms that work for you, whether it's through tenant improvements or through a rent that is adjusted based on how expensive it will be to actually build out your space. And then the last person that you want in your corner is an insurance broker. The lease has a lot of information about insurance that you will need to carry by the time that you either start construction or you open. The insurance broker is somebody who can tell you if the terms that you're getting from the landlord are appropriate. They'll tell you if it is appropriate for your type of business that you're running, and if it's the market, right? So if you're a retailer and they're asking you to carry insurance that a restaurant, or I was thinking of like something that's very experiential, your insurance broker can tell you.
You don't need the same insurance that Target does.
Right. I'm thinking of a very specific type of throwing activity indoors. At any rate, you only need the insurance that you need to carry as a retailer versus insurance that may be sort of ad hoc depending on your needs. So these are the full team of folks that you're going to want in your corner as you are signing your lease and your LOI. The other person that is not paid by you, but I think is very important, having been an economic development professional myself, are your Main Street directors, your BID, your business improvement district directors and managers, and then any folks that work in your economic development corporations nearby. Not every neighborhood or Main Street has somebody who's working day in and day out to make sure that the retail environment thrives. But if you are in a neighborhood that has somebody in that seat, make sure you talk to them. It doesn't matter if you know what question you need to ask. Just like if you go to a library, sometimes you just you want to read a book, but you don't quite know what books are out. Just go and ask and see what that person has to say, because more often times than not, the economic development professional that's working on your behalf has a lot of information that they'd love to impart and share with you that you will be able to internalize and utilize throughout this entire process. And vice versa, if you are an economic development professional or community development organizer, you never know who's going to walk through your doors. So make sure you have enough resources so that they are prepared and they can walk away feeling as though they've taken something really valuable. So we have a lot of resources for those types of organizations. We have, if this was the entry level into retail real estate, we have sort of a deeper level called Foundations of Real Estate. It's a 90-minute training course that really gives you all the retail real estate fundamentals for the economic development professionals so that you can make sure that you're communicating really strongly to all the retailers that are coming to you. And then we do consulting work for retailers and Main Streets across the board in a variety of ways. But at the end of this call, we can talk to Patrick and find a way to make sure that folks who want the Foundations of Real Estate course can get that from us.
Okay, great. So our business is open, we're operating, and great news, we're approaching the end of our first term of our lease. So, oh my gosh, it's year 4, we're starting year 4, and it's time for us to decide, are we going to renew our lease? Do we want to continue operating in this space? Do we want to relocate? Do we want to close? What do we want to do? So we'll talk about lease renewals. And this is really what the decision to stay in place at the expiration of your lease term. We have a resource, it's this great PDF that will guide you. It's like a decision tree that will guide you through when, how, and to engage with your landlord, depending on your situation, and where you find the information you need in your lease. So this is just a little snippet of what it looks like. The decision tree will help you figure out, am I staying, am I leaving? How long do I need? How do I approach my landlord? One thing that we like to flag here is that whatever your plans are, you should really kind of set a calendar reminder for a year before the expiration of your first term of your lease, because there will be a date in your lease that you have to provide notice, right? Where the landlord says, you've got to tell me 6 months before your term ends if you're going to stay or not. But that's when you have to tell them what your decision is. So you need time before that to figure out, what do I want to do? Is there anything that I want changed before I sign to extend my lease? So if you're looking at things about a year out, that gives you really enough time. If you know you want to move, you've got a little bit of time to do that. If you aren't sure, the landlord, you think they might want to raise rent, or because you haven't already locked that in, whatever it is, like having a year, you can always put it down and pick it back up 3 months later, but it always takes longer than you think. So you definitely want to be starting to think about the end of your lease at least a year before it ends. So when you initiate the discussions, it really kind of depends on your situation. But like I said, it's usually sooner than you think. These conversations take a long time. And then some of the factors that impact the timing are whether or not you have a renewal option. Ideally, if you've worked with a good broker the first time, you have at least one renewal option, which allows you to make the decision about whether you want to extend for another 5 years or another 10 years. So typically, we see renewal periods given for sort of like equal to the same amount of initial term. So what do I mean by that? If I'm signing for 5 years, I'd like to get a renewal option for another 5 years. If I'm signing for 10 years, I would like 2 renewal options, 5 years and then 5 years. But the goal when you have a successful business is to keep growing, keep, being a part of a community, succeeding. And you want the security to know that I got my lease, this is the rent we're going with, and I'm safe to be here, over this long, into the foreseeable future. So ideally, you have a renewal option. Either way, there's a notice date about when you need to let the landlord know if you want to stay or go. If you don't have a renewal right, a renewal option, then you don't have the right to say, yes, I want to stay. When you have a renewal option, you're saying, I want to stay, and all of the terms that I've negotiated in this lease are just going to stay. Same lease, another 5 years. When your lease expires, if you don't have that lease renewal option, that's when your landlord can raise your rent, right? Because your initial term, that's over. So everything that you agreed to, blank slate. So that's one of the main reasons that we want renewal options. But generally, depending on whether you're going to stay and you've got the right to do that, or you want to stay and you don't, you might need more or less time. Is your rental rate in your renewal option, did you already determine it? Yep, it's just another 3% increase over the next year. Or does it say it's going to be the market rent where we've got to negotiate it a little more? Are there any things that we know we want to change in our lease? Like, we've been a bookstore, we're only allowed to be a bookstore, but we want to add a coffee component. Or we are a boutique and we want to make sure we can do, private events where people can have cocktail trucks out front, whatever it is. Like, if you want to change terms in your lease, you want to think about that to put on the table when you're when you're renewing your lease. And then also, you want to think hard about, would you want to relocate? Like, if you don't get, what are your deal breaker terms this time? And if I can't get them, do I want to go somewhere else? What other opportunities are there? Is there another space that's better? What is it? So it's like, these are all the things that you want to think about that impact the timing there. Now, one thing that's really important to remember is that you have so much power when you are renegotiating a lease, right? Or when you are renewing a lease. Once you have already proven to the landlord that you're a good tenant who pays rent on time, and lovely people from the community come, you're bringing value to their property, they really want to keep you. And even if they think, well, I feel like I could get higher rent somewhere, it is always cheaper to keep your current tenant. So there's like a little saying in retail real estate, cheaper to keep her. So ideally your landlord wants you to stay. So knowing that, that's sort of baseline. But also, you're now a proven concept, right? If in the beginning maybe you weren't, you've shown that this works. That's why you're re-upping for another 5 years. So you really want to think about and start to write down like how awesome you are. So when you're thinking about, you already know it. If you're a business owner, you know like all the wonderful things that you do for the property and for the community and everything you've done. So like start keeping a record of that, because you know it to be true, and it's when you need it, it's a lot easier if you've already written some of these things down. So when you're coming into the lease renewal with this new power this time around, oftentimes people want to revisit the security deposit. Like maybe you had to put 2 months up or 3 months up as a security deposit when you first signed the lease. Well, like, can I get all but 1 month back? Right? I've shown you I'm going to pay the rent. So like, can you get some of your security deposit back? If you had a full guarantee, a full personal guarantee on the lease term, can you get it down to a limited term? Can you get it to 12 months? Can you get it to 24 months? If you had 24, can you get it to 12? If you had 12 or 24 or anything, like, can you get rid of it? So if it's a guarantee or the security deposit that's really important to you, you can absolutely bring that up. Your store probably needs a refresh about every 5 years. So would you like the landlord to give you $20,000, $30,000, $80,000 to help you redo the floors or paint this, whatever? So what do you want to refresh, and can you get some money out of the landlord? Do you want to take over your neighbor's space? Do you want to pop into a storage unit, like, or a storage area next door? Like, do you want to expand in place? So if you want to do any sort of expansion, that would really be part of the renewal as well. And then really anything that you kind of held your nose and agreed to in the beginning that still really chafes at you, this is really the time to either bring that up, or something that you didn't think was going to be an issue that has proven to be an issue that you really want to address. Like sometimes there are rules about your required hours of operation. Maybe that's something that you really need changed. So that was a lot. There's a lot more. We're always happy to make sure you're getting the information you need. We have a YouTube channel with more videos than you could ever want that define every single LOI term. So, and lots of other videos about construction and the process and all that. So we're just at Pedal Retail on YouTube, and we would want to make sure that you have access to that.
All right, so I know that there's already one question in the comments from folks who either own or are contemplating buying a retail space. And I think the question really is, how different is the planning that they need to do if they're going to buy a retail space? How different is that from leasing a retail space? So that is the first question. And if there's others, please feel free to drop those in the chat now.
Do you mean buying like a building or buying?
A building, yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, well, typically, and we don't do commercial sales. So we don't do building sales, but this is what we do know. Sales tend to be faster because you're just transferring an asset, right? If the two parties can agree on a price, then and everyone's doing their due diligence, you can, couple months if you're going fast. This takes so long because it's not something that's mine that becomes yours. We're negotiating a relationship, right? Like, I'm always going to own the property. You're always just going to be doing your business there, but we've got to figure out what that's going to look like. So typically much faster, but exactly the same process of business planning. Because if it just means that you're the landlord now, you need to know, like, well, how much space do I really need to do my business? Can this business support my entire mortgage, or do I need to rent out the apartment above? Am I allowed to rent out the apartment above? So you really want to do all of the business planning to figure out, like, does the math? can I have all the things that I need to have before you would say like, yeah, I want to buy it. And the only sort of extra thing that you really need to think about is like, do you want to be a landlord? Because that's a whole thing in itself. So depending on the property, that has a whole host of responsibilities that may or may not make sense if you're also trying to operate a retail business.
Great question, Phyllis. Thank you.
That's great. Well, if there's any other questions, please feel free to either drop them in the chat, or Patrick, can folks come off mute, or best
They
to put them in
cannot
the
come
chat?
off mute. They can always send us follow-up questions. We will provide your email and the follow-up email that we do, as well as we'll be able to make sure we get any questions that do come in. So if we don't, in just a couple seconds or so. But,
yeah, absolutely.
if we don't have any questions, Sheila, Faith, thank you so much for being on today. This was amazing. I think, the idea of understanding what you want before you're going in, making sure this is the right agreement and partnership. I mean, a lot of retailers, they are leasing their properties. I know some are looking to buy, but this is an incredibly important thing to understand what you're getting into. And you all have a lot of other resources. Do you want to repeat that again, your YouTube channel for the audience?
Yes, our handle is just Pedal Retail. So that's for social media, PEDAL Retail. Pedal like a gas pedal, bike pedal. Pedal Retail, that's the same for YouTube, Instagram. We're pedalretail.com. So we're in all of those places. And if I could just make one more note, Patrick, like this, what everything talked about is relevant if you're in a small town or if you're in Manhattan. So there can be a tendency to think like, we're in a small town, everybody knows everybody, like this is going to be easy or it's not a big deal. Really, like the process is the process. It might be easier in some kind of ways, but ultimately a lease agreement is a legal contract. Everything ends in court if it goes sideways. So you do want to protect yourself and take care of your business the same way wherever you are.
Absolutely. And someone just commented, appreciate being in a small town where it might be a little easier in some ways, but again, it's the exact same. It's the same contract.
Mm-hmm. Same business planning. Mm-hmm.
Again, if you do have any questions, you can. We will follow up with recording of this, and as well as Sheila and Faith's contact information for you to be able to reach out to them. Sheila and Faith, thank you so much for being on today, and you all can contact Pedal Retail to find out more. Thank you.